A lot of people now turning their attention back to Washington, where I'm told we have yet another budget deadline ahead of us here, and I'm not really clear if we're going to get this done.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think any of us are very clear about it, but we thought we would focus really on debt and deficit and what's going on right now, what's going on with that deal that Romaine just talked about, but also more broadly as we come into an election, what difference that might make to the economy, and particularly debt and deficit. For that, we turn to a true expert in the area. It's Maya MacGuineas, Committee for Responsible Federal Budget President. So, Maya, thanks very much for joining us. Before we turn to what the candidates are proposing, let's talk about that tentative $1.6 trillion deal that they say is a spending limit. Is that going to, if it goes through, because we got some steps to take, is that going to help us on the debt and the deficit?
You know, it is. And I'm not used to delivering good news when it comes to fiscal policy. But this is part of the Fiscal Responsibility Act that you'll remember a few months back was passed in order to avert defaulting and allowed us to lift the debt ceiling. I will say that that deal was terrible in that fact that we were talking about even defaulting should never be a discussion. But on the fiscal front, they actually made real progress by putting in some spending caps. Then we had a number of bumps in the road because the spending caps had what were called side deals. They were very tricky. Nobody understood the details. This is further clarification of how those side deals will work. And it will, in fact, lead to significant savings of $1 trillion or more, which is much, much more than we've seen in even a decade. So this is an important first step forward in terms of moving in the direction of improving our debt and deficit instead of making it worse. But I will say it only focused on the domestic discretionary portion of the budget. That's the least problematic area of the budget. We're really going to have to look at the bigger issues of mandatory spending, healthcare, retirement, and taxes.
Yeah, well, let's talk about some of those mandatory areas, such as Social Security and Medicare. And let's talk about the election coming up. We are getting some economic policy proposals now out of the candidates. And let's focus for the moment, at least, on the current president, Joe Biden, and the past president, maybe future president, Donald Trump. And as you look at their proposals, would they help us at all on the larger issues with respect to the budget?
So far, neither of those candidates has put out anything close to a plan overall that would do anything to improve deficits and debt. And because both of them, one is a former president, one is a current president, have fiscal records, we can also look at what they've done while they've been in office. And both of those presidents, even if you take the terrible period of COVID when we had to borrow, and it was the right thing to do to borrow, but both President Trump and President Biden in fact, made the fiscal situation worse during their presidencies in the periods of economic strength, meaning that rather than paying for all of their policies, they borrowed for a number of their policies. However, President Trump borrowed significantly more, many trillions more in dollars than President Biden has. And more recently, President Biden has actually overseen steps in the right direction, including both the Inflation Reduction Act, which was trying to generate savings, not clear if it will, and then more recently, the Fiscal Responsibility Act, this bipartisan change. So that has been an improvement. But when it looks to the campaign promises they are making, both of them are actually focusing far more on the things they will not do. Most importantly, as you mentioned, neither of them has a plan to fix Social Security. And in fact, both of them have made promises in the past not to touch Social Security, not to fix Social Security. What that means is beneficiaries will face a 23% across the board benefit cut if we do nothing. So not only is that not improving the fiscal situation, that's leaving those who depend on Social Security at risk. We know the campaign season is not a good one for people being realistic about hard choices, but we haven't heard many hard choices out of either of them so far.
Well, on that Social Security front, and we can really have the same conversation about all the entitlement programs, is how do you actually address that? I mean, it's one thing to sort of look at it from an intellectual and academic exercise and say, okay, here's what we need to do to change to get this under control. Most of those suggestions, I would think, would be completely politically unpalatable to most people out there, particularly anyone at or near retirement age.
Yeah, the unfortunate reality is that fiscal responsibility is usually not politically palatable. And that's become more true in the recent years and decade because everybody kind of competes to be more about giveaways. Here are tax cuts, here are spending increases. We won't pay for any of them. That's become the political norm. And the political competition is on basically who can give away more. The problem is that's led us to years and years of borrowing too much. We now have a debt that's about to be at record levels. Interest payments that are the fastest growing part of the budget, about to be larger than defense. Social Security and Medicare both headed towards insolvency. And we're going to have to make some of those hard choices. When it comes to something like Social Security, easy for me to say because I'm not in politics, but we have to do a little bit of everything. We're going to need to slow the growth of benefits for people on the higher end of the income scale. lift the payroll tax cap so people pay more, raise the retirement age for younger workers. All of those policies are going to need to be part of a realistic solution so that benefits are available as promised and to those who need the most.
But I mean, I'm sure you saw some of the incidents involving Nikki Haley, who basically made it clear that she did actually favor raising the retirement age. And I think some other candidates also did, to be fair to her. But even she's been forced to kind of walk that back, or at least to try to tamp it down a little bit, because look, you propose something like that and all of a sudden you have a lot of voters that look at you like you're the worst person in the world.
Yeah, part of this, we're actually going to have to look at ourselves as the voters, which is that if we don't want debt at the record levels, higher than it's even been right after World War II, we're going to have to actually start asking our candidates and our politicians to make those hard choices. And so when you have a Nikki Haley or a Chris Christie who's out there talking much more realistically about the kinds of proposals that we need to be looking at, and there are many options, but they're talking about the need to do it, we can either choose to reward people who are willing to level with us and tell us the truth, or we continue to ask for all sorts of free lunch situations, and our debt will get worse. Our economy will be weaker for it. And more recently, it's become so clear that our high levels of debt are not just an economic threat, they're a geopolitical threat. They are a risk to national security. And so the more we ask our politicians to give us things in a reckless way instead of a responsible way, the more we jeopardize our economy, our national security, and our future. So in many ways, you're right, it is up to us. Are we going to say, thanks for telling the truth about the kinds of fixes we need to deal, or are we going to ask for more fairy tale solutions, which just won't work?